The crying wasn't loud. That was what made it unsettling. At 2:17 a.m., Choi Ji-hoon, 33, self-made tech billionaire, known in Seoul's business circles as the man with no weaknesses, stepped out of his home office and froze. The sound came from the west wing of his mansion, soft, broken, like someone trying very hard not to be heard. Ji-hoon had lived alone for years. Silence was normal. Control was normal. This wasn't. He followed the sound barefoot across polished marble floors until he stopped outside the servants' corridor. That was when he realized something that disturbed him even more. The crying belonged to Carolyn, the quiet black maid he barely noticed, except for how carefully she avoided eye contact. And she was whispering someone's name through tears, a name Ji-hoon had never heard before. It's a new year, and while others scroll past stories like this, you stayed. That means you care, you feel. You don't want to miss moments that remind us we're alive. So subscribe, join this family, and tell me where you're watching from. Your presence matters more than you think today. The Seoul skyline glittered like scattered diamonds against velvet darkness, but Park Ji-hoon saw none of its beauty. He stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of his penthouse office, hands clasped behind his back, watching the city he had conquered without ever feeling victorious. At 34, he had accumulated more wealth than 3 generations could spend. Forbes featured his face annually. Business rivals whispered his name with equal parts admiration and terror. The financial world had crowned him untouchable, and he had accepted that throne without ceremony or celebration, because Park Ji-hoon felt nothing about any of it. The emptiness had become so familiar that he no longer recognized it as emptiness. It simply existed. A hollow space where emotions should have lived, evacuated long ago when a 6-year-old boy learned that crying brought no comfort and hoping brought only disappointment. His mother had left on a Tuesday morning. He remembered the day because she had made him breakfast, the only time she ever had, eggs and toast, slightly burned. He had eaten every bite, believing it meant something had changed. By evening, her closet stood empty. His father, a man who measured love in business transactions, had simply hired another nanny and never mentioned her name again. Weakness is expensive, his father had said when Ji-hoon, still small enough to believe in comfort, had asked when she was coming back. Tears cost more than they're worth. Ji-hoon had never cried again. He had instead learned to build empires, to acquire companies, to command rooms with silence rather than speeches. Control became his oxygen. Predictability became his religion. Every element of his existence operated within systems he had designed, schedules that never shifted, employees who never questioned, and a mansion outside Seoul that functioned like clockwork. The mansion itself was a masterpiece of architectural intimidation, 12,000 square feet of marble, glass, and carefully curated silence. Every room maintained at exactly 68 degrees. Every surface polished until reflections hurt. 53 staff members operated on rotation so precise that Ji-hoon could navigate his home blindfolded and never encounter an unexpected presence. He had purchased the estate 5 years ago, after his father's death left him truly alone in the world. It was supposed to feel like achievement, like arrival. Instead, it felt like what it was, a monument to a man who had everything except a single reason to come home to it. His bedroom remained untouched most nights. He slept at the office more often than not, finding the hum of working systems more comforting than domestic silence. When he did return to the mansion, he walked its halls like a ghost haunting his own life, waiting for something he couldn't name. He had stopped trying to name it years ago. The mansion's night staff operated in shadows, and none more effectively than the American woman assigned to the West Wing. Carolyn Morrison had worked at the Park estate for 11 months, though most daytime employees couldn't recall her face. She existed in the margins of the household, a signature on timesheets, a name on rotation schedules, nothing more. Head housekeeper Mrs. Back had hired her during an emergency staffing shortage, impressed by references that checked out flawlessly and a work ethic that bordered on obsessive. She arrived precisely at 10 each night. She left precisely at 6 each morning. She requested no holidays, no schedule adjustments, no interactions with other staff beyond the minimum required for task coordination. She was, by all measurable standards, the perfect employee. She was also deeply, almost pathologically strange. Her cleaning routes never varied. West wing, third floor, the library, the gallery hallway. Areas that received the least traffic and required the least attention. Yet she cleaned them with religious devotion. Surfaces already spotless received her careful attention. Windows without fingerprints were wiped again. Floors that hadn't felt footsteps in weeks were mopped until they gleamed. She avoided the main corridors. She never spoke in the staff kitchen. When other night workers gathered for breaks, she found tasks in empty rooms. Her meals were eaten alone, standing up, finished in minutes. The gossip about her circulated in whispers. She never looks anyone in the eye. I tried talking to her once. She acted like I was speaking another language. Something's wrong with that one, too quiet, too careful. Why does she always want the West Wing? There's nothing there. The last observation carried the most curiosity. The West Wing at 2 a.m. was perhaps the most unnecessary assignment in the mansion. Ji-hoon never entered those rooms. No one did. The furniture sat beneath dust covers, the art remained unviewed, and the silence pressed so thick it felt deliberate. Yet every night, Carolyn Morrison walked those abandoned hallways as if they mattered more than anything else in the house. Park Ji-hoon had never noticed her. He had never noticed any member of his household staff beyond their function, moving parts in a machine designed to maintain his world without requiring his attention. They existed to ensure his life operated smoothly, and they accomplished this best by remaining invisible. Carolyn Morrison had perfected invisibility. For 11 months, she had moved through his home without ever occupying his awareness. Her existence registered as static, background noise in a symphony of efficiency, until the night it didn't. Ji-hoon had returned to the mansion unexpectedly. A canceled meeting in Tokyo, a rare impulse to sleep in his own bed. His driver had pulled through the gates at 1:47 a.m., and the house had greeted him with its familiar, expensive silence. He had dismissed his personal assistant's offer to wake the household manager. He wanted nothing except the unconsciousness that work couldn't provide tonight. Exhaustion sat behind his eyes like weight, and for once, he intended to surrender to it. The walk to his bedroom took him past the West Wing corridor. That was when he heard it. Crying. Not the dramatic sobbing of films or the performative weeping of boardroom negotiations. This was different, raw, strangled, desperately suppressed. The sound of someone fighting tears and losing. Ji-hoon stopped walking. He should have continued to his room. The sound was not his concern. Household matters fell under Mrs. Beck's jurisdiction. Whatever emotional crisis was unfolding in his West Wing could be addressed by appropriate personnel during appropriate hours. Yet his feet moved toward the sound. The library door stood slightly ajar. Through the gap, dim moonlight illuminated a figure crouched between bookshelves, a woman in the plain uniform of his cleaning staff, one hand pressed against her mouth to contain the sounds escaping anyway. He pushed the door open. She reacted like he'd fired a gun. Her head snapped up. Her body went rigid. The tears stopped instantly, replaced by an expression he recognized from hostile takeovers and courtroom battles. Terror. Not embarrassment, not sheepish apology. Pure, undiluted fear, the kind that lived in bodies, not minds. "I'll leave tonight." Her voice emerged hoarse, shaking, already resigned. She rose to her feet, smoothing her uniform with trembling hands, eyes fixed on a point somewhere past his shoulder. Ji-hoon frowned. Most employees caught crying would apologize, would explain, would scramble to preserve their position with desperate justifications. This woman offered no defense. She simply stated her intention to disappear, as if his discovery had activated an evacuation plan long prepared. She moved toward the door, toward escape. He should let her go. This was precisely the kind of complication his life was designed to avoid. Emotional involvement, personal entanglement, the messy humanity of other people's problems. Stop! The word left his mouth before his brain authorized it. She froze mid-step, still not looking at him, still radiating that animal terror that made no logical sense. Ji-hoon did something he had never done in his own home. He sat down on the floor. The marble was cold through his tailored trousers. The position was ridiculous. A billionaire cross-legged on his own library floor at 2 a.m, but standing felt wrong. Standing maintained the power dynamic that was clearly paralyzing her. She stared at him now, actually at him for the first time. Her eyes were swollen from crying, red-rimmed and exhausted. American features, but something hollow beneath them. Something hunted. "Sit down," he said. Not a command, an invitation. She didn't move. "I'm not going to fire you for having emotions in my library. Sit." Slowly, like a deer, considering whether the hunter had truly lowered his weapon, she sank to the floor across from him. Her knees drew up to her chest, protective, defensive. They sat in silence for a long moment. Ji-hoon studied her, this invisible woman who had worked in his home for nearly a year without once registering in his consciousness. Plain features made plainer by deliberate effort. Hair pulled back severely, no jewelry, no makeup, everything about her designed to avoid notice. Yet here she was, noticed, impossible to ignore. "Why this wing?" he asked finally. "Every night, the same empty rooms. Why?" She flinched at the question, which told him he had accidentally struck something significant. "It's quiet," she whispered. "The entire house is quiet at 2 a.m. "Not like this," her voice cracked on the last word. "Not this kind of quiet." He didn't understand. He filed the answer away for later analysis. "What were you crying about?" She shook her head. The walls were going back up. He could see it happening. The careful reconstruction of whatever mask she wore through her days. "You wouldn't understand." "Try me." Her laugh was bitter, broken, entirely without humor. "Why do you care? I'm nobody. I clean your floors. I'll be gone by morning, and you'll forget this conversation by noon. I don't forget anything. Then you'll be stuck remembering something pointless." The dismissal should have annoyed him. Instead, it intrigued him. Everyone wanted something from Park Ji-hoon: money, influence, access, attention. This woman wanted nothing except to vanish from his presence without consequence. "You're not leaving tonight," he said. Fear flickered across her features again. "Mr. Park? You're not leaving because I haven't fired you, and I'm not firing you because you haven't done anything wrong." He paused, watching her process this logic. Crying isn't a terminable offense, even in this house. She stared at him like he was speaking a language she didn't trust herself to translate. "Why were you crying?" he asked again. She was quiet for so long he thought she wouldn't answer. The moonlight shifted through the tall windows. Somewhere in the house, a clock chimed the hour. Finally, she spoke. "This house was never meant to be my home." The words hung between them, weighted with meaning he couldn't decode. She wasn't talking about employment. She wasn't talking about belonging. She was talking about something else entirely. Something that lived beneath the surface of this strange, invisible woman who cleaned empty rooms at 2 a.m. and cried in libraries she thought no one would enter. Ji-hoon felt something shift in his chest, something that had been frozen so long he barely recognized the thaw. He didn't know her story yet. He didn't know why she hid, why she feared, why this particular wing called to her in ways she couldn't explain. But he was going to find out. The library held its breath around them. Ji-hoon remained on the cold marble floor, watching this woman, this stranger who had lived inside his walls for nearly a year, struggle with words that clearly wanted to stay buried. "You asked why I clean at night," Carolyn finally said. Her voice had steadied, but her hands still trembled against her knees. "You want the real answer? I don't ask questions I want lies for." She almost smiled. Almost. Night is when invisible people can exist without explanation. Daylight asks questions. Daylight notices faces. Daylight remembers. And you don't want to be remembered. I can't be remembered. The correction carried weight. There's a difference between preference and survival, Mr. Park. He studied her face in the moonlight, the deliberate plainness, the downcast posture, the way she positioned herself near exits, even while sitting. Everything about her screamed escape route. Everything whispered temporary. "The West Wing," he pressed. "Why specifically these rooms?" Her gaze drifted toward the windows, toward the darkness beyond the glass. "When I first started here, I explored during my shifts, learning the layout, planning routes. The West Wing was..." She paused, searching for words. "Empty. Forgotten. Nobody comes here. Nobody thinks about these rooms. Neither do I." "Exactly." She met his eyes briefly before looking away. "You built this entire wing and then abandoned it, filled it with beautiful things and never returned to see them. It's like this place exists outside of time, outside of attention. You're describing a hiding place. I'm describing the only peace I've found in 3 years. The admission hung between them, heavier than it should have been. 3 years. She had been running or hiding for 3 years before landing in his mansion. "The silence here isn't empty," she continued softly. "It's protective. During the day, there's noise, voices, people who might look too closely. But at 2 a.m., in these rooms, I can almost forget that I'm supposed to be afraid." "Supposed to be?" Her jaw tightened. She had said too much. He watched her rebuild walls in real time, brick by brick, the vulnerability retreating behind practiced blankness. "Forget I said anything. I should go. You should stay." She didn't leave, but she didn't relax either. The tension in her body reminded Ji-hoon of cornered animals, calculating odds, measuring distances. "How did you get this job?" he asked. "Specifically. Walk me through it." "I applied, interviewed with Mrs. Beck. She hired me." "That's the official version. Give me the real one." Carolyn's breath caught, a small sound, quickly suppressed, but he noticed. He noticed everything now. "Why does it matter? I do my work. I don't cause problems. You're crying alone in my library at 2 a.m. That's a problem." He leaned forward slightly. "Not for me. For you. And I find myself unexpectedly interested in solving it. I'm not a business acquisition, Mr. Park. No. You're considerably more complicated." He waited. Silence was a negotiation tool he wielded expertly. Most people rushed to fill empty spaces with words. Carolyn was not most people. She sat with the quiet, matching his patience, testing whether he would break first. He didn't. Finally, she exhaled. "I was placed." The word landed strangely. Placed. Not hired, not recruited. Placed like furniture, like an object positioned according to someone else's design. "Explain." "Someone arranged for me to work here. The interview, the references, the background check, all of it was handled before I walked through Mrs. Beck's door. I just had to show up and perform the role." "Who arranged it?" "A man I've never met face to face. He communicates through encrypted messages. Burner phones that change monthly. He told me this position would keep me safe." Her voice hardened. He told me to stay invisible, blend in, survive. Don't make connections, don't attract attention, don't exist beyond the function. Ji-hoon's mind raced through implications. Someone with enough reach to forge credentials, manipulate hiring processes, and position an asset inside one of Seoul's most secured private residences. He watches you. From afar. Checks in every few weeks. Confirms I'm following protocol. She laughed bitterly. Protocol. Like I'm a program, not a person. Like my life is just a series of commands to execute. Why does this man care where you work? Because if the wrong people find me... She stopped, swallowed. Because staying invisible isn't about preference, Mr. Park. It's the only thing keeping me breathing. The clock, somewhere in the house, chimed 3 times. Neither of them moved. Tell me, Ji-hoon said quietly, not demanding, asking. Perhaps for the first time in years, genuinely asking another person to let him into their world. Carolyn closed her eyes. When she opened them, something had shifted. A decision made, a dam breaking. 4 years ago, I worked for a man named Victor Crane, import-export business based in Miami, legitimate on paper, underneath. Her voice flattened, emotions deliberately stripped away. Girls, young girls. They came in shipping containers, they left in pieces or not at all. Ji-hoon's stomach turned. He had encountered darkness in business, corruption, greed, the casual cruelty of powerful men. But this was different. This was evil. I was a bookkeeper, just numbers. I told myself I didn't know what the numbers meant. Her hands curled into fists. But I knew. Everyone knew. We just pretended the paperwork was paperwork and went home to our normal lives. What changed? A girl escaped. 13 years old. Found her hiding in the warehouse where I worked late one night. She was bleeding, terrified, barely spoke English. Carolyn's voice cracked. She looked at me like I could save her, like I was her last hope. Did you? I tried. Tears slipped down her cheeks, silent, unstoppable. I got her out, contacted authorities, agreed to testify, handed over everything I knew. Names, accounts, routes, buyers, the whole network. And Crane? Arrested, tried, convicted. She paused. For 18 months. Then his appeals started working. Evidence got suppressed. Witnesses started disappearing. The federal protection I was promised got reassigned to higher priority cases. Ji-hoon understood now. The hiding, the fear, the desperate invisibility. You were abandoned. I was disposed of. The word carried bitterness, refined by years of survival. The case weakened, the prosecutors moved on, and I was left with a target on my back and a countdown timer I couldn't stop. Countdown to what? The statute of limitations expires in 4 months. After that, the remaining charges can't be refiled. Crane's lawyers are already preparing his release paperwork, and once he's free... She shuddered. The other witnesses who helped build the case, 3 of them died in accidents before the trial even ended. I'm the last one who can still hurt him, the last voice, the last evidence. So you came here. The man who placed me, he said Korea was far enough, said your mansion was secure enough, said if I stayed invisible long enough, maybe I'd survive long enough for this to end. Her laugh was hollow. 4 months. That's all I needed. 4 months of not existing, and maybe I'd get to exist again afterward. But tonight I realized it doesn't matter. Fresh tears fell. Even if I survive the countdown, Crane will never stop looking. Men like him have long memories. I'll be running forever, or I'll be dead. Those are my options. Ji-hoon sat with the weight of her words. His carefully constructed world, built on control, predictability, emotional distance, suddenly felt obscenely small. He had spent decades insulating himself from human messiness, while this woman fought daily just to breathe. You could have told me. The words surprised him as they left his mouth. I own this house. I have resources, security, connections. You've worked here 11 months and you never once asked a billionaire for help? Carolyn cut him off, voice sharp. Approached the most powerful man in Korea with a story about trafficking and government abandonment? I would have listened. Her eyes met his directly now. No deference, no fear, just exhausted truth. Men like you don't listen to women like me. The sentence hit him like a physical blow. We're invisible to you. We clean your floors and serve your meals and exist in your peripheral vision. But you never actually see us. You see functions, roles, staff, not people with stories, not women with wars they're fighting alone. Ji-hoon opened his mouth to protest, but the words died. Because she was right. Devastatingly, completely right. He had walked past her for 11 months without ever registering her as human. I've never asked for your attention because I learned long ago that powerful men give attention selectively. To people who benefit them, to problems that affect their interests. My survival doesn't benefit you. My story doesn't affect your bottom line. You're wrong. Am I? She shook her head slowly. You're only sitting on this floor because you stumbled into my breakdown accidentally. Tomorrow you'll return to your meetings and mergers. Next week you'll forget my name. That's not cruelty. It's just how your world works. The assessment shouldn't have wounded him. He had built his world exactly as she described, efficient, detached, selectively engaged. But hearing it reflected back felt different, felt like indictment. What would it take, he said slowly, for you to believe that I'm listening now? Carolyn stared at him for a long moment, measuring, deciding. Then she reached into her uniform pocket and withdrew a small flash drive. This contains everything: financial records, communication logs, names of buyers who were never prosecuted, evidence the prosecutors couldn't use because it was obtained outside proper channels. Ji-hoon's eyes locked on the small device. You kept copies. Insurance. Leverage, the only thing keeping Crane from sending someone directly into this house. She turned the drive over in her fingers. If I die, this goes public. He knows that. It's the only reason I'm still breathing. Then why are you showing me? Because someone's already looking for it. Her voice dropped to a whisper. I got a message 2 days ago. A photograph of my mother's grave in Ohio. Flowers I didn't send. A note. Where did you hide it, Carolyn? The temperature in the room seemed to drop. They're close, she continued. Closer than they've ever been. And this countdown everyone thinks will end in 4 months? She looked at him with eyes that had accepted their own fate. I don't think I have 4 months anymore. I don't think I have 4 weeks. Ji-hoon took the flash drive from her trembling hand. Then we'll have to move faster than they expect. The first black sedan appeared 3 days after their library conversation. Carolyn noticed it immediately, parked across the estate's main entrance, windows tinted beyond legal limits, engine running, despite the empty driver's seat visible through the windshield. It stayed for 6 hours, then vanished. The next morning, a different vehicle occupied the same position. Different plates, same silence, same watching. She stopped sleeping. The exhaustion carved hollows beneath her eyes, but sleep meant vulnerability. Sleep meant dreams, where shipping containers opened and girls screamed and Victor Crane smiled with teeth like a predator who had already won. Consciousness was torture, but unconsciousness was worse. Ji-hoon noticed the change during their second conversation, 4 nights after the first. He had started visiting the West Wing library deliberately now, 2 a.m. arrivals that pretended to be coincidence but fooled neither of them. When did you last sleep? He asked, studying the tremor in her hands. Define sleep. More than 2 consecutive hours? Then I don't remember. He frowned, but didn't push. Instead, he shared what his security team had discovered. The sedans were rentals, paid with untraceable prepaid cards, returned each evening and replaced with fresh vehicles each morning. Professional surveillance, patient surveillance. The phone calls started the following week. The mansion's private line, a number known only to senior staff and Ji-hoon's closest associates, began ringing at odd hours. When answered, silence stretched for exactly 30 seconds before disconnection. No breathing, no background noise. Just empty space designed to communicate presence without content. Mrs. Bayek reported the calls with visible unease. 3 times yesterday, sir. Twice this morning. The caller ID shows nothing. Ji-hoon added additional security protocols. The calls continued. Then the staff began acting strangely. Small things, initially. A groundskeeper who had worked the estate for 8 years suddenly resigned without notice. A kitchen assistant asked pointed questions about night shift schedules before transferring to the day rotation. The new delivery driver lingered too long at the service entrance, eyes cataloging camera positions. Carolyn tracked each anomaly with the hypervigilance of prey-sensing predators. She created mental maps of escape routes. She started carrying her flash drive at all times, tucked into a hidden pocket she had sewn into her uniform herself. Every footstep in the hallway made her flinch. Every door opening sent her heart racing. Every shadow contained the possibility of ending. "They're testing the perimeter," she told Ji-hoon during one of their midnight meetings. "Probing for weaknesses, learning patterns. This is how it starts." "How what starts?" "The disappearing." Her voice was flat, clinical, the tone of someone describing their own autopsy. "They watch until they understand. Then they move, fast, final. By the time anyone notices something's wrong, there's nothing left to find." On the 10th night, Carolyn arrived at the library carrying a manila envelope. Ji-hoon watched her place it on the floor between them, with the reverence usually reserved for sacred objects or live explosives. The paper was worn at the edges, handled countless times, protected fiercely. "The flash drive is digital backup," she explained. "This is the original documentation, names, dates, transaction records, everything I copied before I testified." He opened the envelope carefully. Photographs spilled out first, grainy images of warehouse interiors, shipping manifests, girls with numbers written on their arms. His stomach revolted, but he forced himself to look, to witness. Bank statements followed. Wire transfers from shell companies to offshore accounts. Payment schedules that corresponded to shipment arrivals documented in separate logs. The paper trail was meticulous, damning, impossible to dismiss. Finally, a handwritten list of names, some crossed out, some circled, some annotated with dates and locations. "The crossed-out ones are dead," Carolyn said quietly. "The circled ones are still active in Crane's network. The annotations are buyers, men who purchased girls like products and returned to their normal lives like nothing happened." Ji-hoon recognized 3 names on the list. Business leaders he had met at conferences, men who sat on charitable boards and smiled for cameras and hid monsters beneath expensive suits. "This should have ended him," he said. "It should have. But evidence without enforcement is just paper." She met his eyes directly. "If anything happens to me, these documents need to reach people who will actually use them. Journalists, prosecutors, and jurisdictions Crane hasn't corrupted. Someone with enough power to finish what I started. Nothing's going to happen to you. You can't promise that." "I can try." She shook her head slowly, exhaustion and resignation blending in her expression. "Keep the envelope. Memorize the names. If I disappear, if I die, it means they found me. And if that happens, everything I've survived becomes meaningless, unless this reaches the right hands." Ji-hoon took the envelope like accepting a sacred duty. The board meeting the next morning felt like theater. Ji-hoon sat at the head of the conference table, surrounded by men in identical suits, discussing quarterly projections, merger opportunities, and market expansion. The language was familiar: profit margins, competitive advantage, strategic positioning. He had spoken this language fluently his entire adult life. Today, it sounded hollow. His mind kept returning to the photographs, to the numbers on arms, to names on a list that included men who probably sat in similar boardrooms, making similar speeches about growth and value and shareholder returns. Men like you don't listen to women like me. Carolyn's words echoed beneath the financial jargon. Power was selective. Attention was currency spent on profitable investments. Suffering that didn't impact bottom lines remained invisible, cleaned up by night staff, hidden in West Wing libraries, ignored by billionaires too busy building empires to notice. Mr. Park, your thoughts on the Hanjin proposal? He blinked, returning to the present. 12 faces stared at him expectantly. Table it. I have other priorities currently. Confused murmurs rippled around the table. Park Ji-hoon didn't table profitable proposals. Park Ji-hoon didn't have priorities that superseded business opportunities. But Park Ji-hoon hadn't yet understood the cost of his comfortable blindness. That afternoon, he made calls. Quiet inquiries to contacts in international law enforcement. Discreet requests for security assessments of his estate. Careful research into Victor Crane's network, his remaining influence, his reach across continents. Each call moved him further from neutrality. Each question transformed him from observer to participant. By evening, he had made his decision. Silence wasn't safety. It was complicity. His power meant nothing if it couldn't protect one woman from monsters who traded in human flesh. He would act, publicly, regardless of consequences. The consequences arrived faster than anticipated. Within 48 hours of his initial inquiries, Ji-hoon's phone erupted with panicked calls from investors. Rumors were circulating, unspecified whispers about the Park Corporation involving itself in sensitive matters. Stock prices dipped. Analysts issued cautious advisories. 3 major partners requested urgent meetings to discuss concerns about company direction. "You're jeopardizing everything," his chief financial officer warned during an emergency call. "Whatever you're doing, stop! The board is threatening intervention." Ji-hoon ended the call without response. The threatening messages began arriving the next day. Anonymous texts to his private number, the same number that wasn't supposed to exist in any accessible database. Powerful men have fallen for less. "Your father built an empire. You're about to destroy it." "She's not worth what you'll lose." He showed none of them to Carolyn. She had enough fear already. Then came the breach attempt. Security footage captured it at 3:17 a.m., a figure in dark clothing scaling the east perimeter wall, moving with professional efficiency toward the service entrance. Alarms triggered. Guards responded. The intruder vanished before interception, leaving only footprints in the manicured gardens. A message. A promise. "We can reach you." Ji-hoon reviewed the footage 7 times. Watching the shadow move through his property like it owned the space. His sanctuary had been violated. His walls had been proven permeable. He found Carolyn in the West Wing, awake despite the hour, staring at the darkness beyond the windows. "They tried to get in," he said without preamble. "They failed, but they'll try again." She nodded, unsurprised. "I should leave. Draw them away from here. Find somewhere else to—" "No." The word came out harder than intended. She turned to face him, startled by his vehemence. "You're not running anymore. You're not hiding in another anonymous location waiting to be found again." He stepped closer, holding her gaze. "From tonight forward, you stay in the main house. My wing, my security, my protection." "That's insane. If they connect me to you publicly, let them connect us. Your reputation is worthless if I use it only for profit." He gestured toward the darkness beyond the window. "They're already here, already watching. Leaving won't save you. It'll just make their job easier. The only advantage we have is resources, security. A fortress they'll have to breach openly if they want to reach you. She stared at him like he was speaking an alien language. Why? Why would you sacrifice everything for someone you didn't know existed 2 weeks ago? Ji-hoon thought of the photographs. The girls with numbers. The men with familiar faces who attended galas and funded hospitals and bought children in the spaces between public appearances. Because some things matter more than quarterly reports. Mrs. Bayek was summoned. Instructions were issued. Carolyn's belongings, what little she possessed, were moved to a guest suite, adjacent to Ji-hoon's private quarters. Security details were doubled. Access protocols were tightened. The household watched with visible confusion as their invisible night cleaner was installed in the main residence like visiting royalty. She stays where I stay, Ji-hoon informed the gathered staff. Her safety is now this household's primary function. Any threat to her is a threat to me personally. Whispers rippled through the room. Questions remained unasked. But the message was unmistakable. Something had fundamentally shifted in the Park household. That night, a final message arrived. Not a text, not a call. A physical letter, slipped beneath the mansion's main gate, retrieved by security, and delivered to Ji-hoon's desk. The envelope contained a single photograph. Ji-hoon and Carolyn visible through the library window, their midnight conversation captured in perfect clarity. Beneath the image, typed words, "Stop now or lose everything. Your money, your empire, your life. This is your only warning." Ji-hoon placed the photograph face down on his desk. Then he picked up his phone and scheduled a press conference. Ji-hoon's finger hovered over the send button. 500 pages of evidence. Bank records, medical files showing Carolyn's injuries, audio recordings from the panic room, security footage time-stamped and cataloged. All of it uploaded to a secure server, ready to be sent to every major news outlet in 3 countries. His name was at the top of the cover letter. Not anonymous, not protected. His. He pressed send at 3:47 a.m. By 6:15 a.m., his phone had died from the volume of incoming calls. By 8 a.m., news vans lined the street outside his building. By noon, hashtag Ji-hoon Kim was trending in 14 countries. The headlines wrote themselves, "Tech Executive Exposes Billion-Dollar Abuse Cover-Up." The janitor who became a whistleblower. Inside the mansion of horrors, one man's fight for justice. But it was the photos that broke the internet. Ji-hoon had included a single image of himself in his janitor's uniform, standing in front of the West Wing. The caption read simply, "I saw everything. I stayed silent. Not anymore." Within 48 hours, the powerful man's empire began to crumble. Shareholders demanded answers. Board members resigned. International partners severed contracts. Law enforcement agencies in 3 jurisdictions opened investigations. The man himself released a statement denying everything, calling Ji-hoon a disgruntled former employee seeking attention. But the evidence was too thorough, too damning, too meticulously documented. The world was watching, and this time they believed the janitor. Ji-hoon lost his company first. Investors pulled out within a week, spooked by the media attention and potential legal liability. The startup he'd spent 3 years building collapsed in 72 hours. Then came the lawsuits. The powerful man's legal team went after him for breach of confidentiality, defamation, theft of private property. The cases were frivolous, everyone knew it, but they cost money to fight. Money Ji-hoon no longer had. His professional reputation followed. Former colleagues stopped returning calls. LinkedIn connections withdrew. A TED Talk he'd been scheduled to give was quietly canceled. His apartment, the one he'd finally saved enough to buy outright, had to be sold to cover legal fees. But on the night he signed the last of the paperwork, sitting in his nearly empty living room with just a sleeping bag and a lamp, Ji-hoon slept for 9 hours straight. No nightmares, no waking at 2 a.m. to the phantom sound of crying. He woke up to sunlight, made instant coffee on the floor, and felt something he hadn't felt in years. Light. The powerful man's lawyers sent another threatening letter that afternoon. Ji-hoon read it, filed it with the others, and didn't feel afraid. He had lost everything he'd worked for, and somehow, he'd never felt richer. The arrest happened on a Tuesday morning. Carolyn was in protective custody by noon. Real protection this time, coordinated by federal prosecutors who joined the case after Ji-hoon's evidence went public. Ji-hoon was allowed to visit her once, in a safe house outside the city. She was sitting by a window when he arrived, wearing jeans and a sweater someone from Victim Services had bought her. Not designer, not expensive, just normal clothes that fit. She looked younger, smaller, real. "They're offering me witness protection," she said without preamble. "New name, new city, new life." Ji-hoon sat down across from her. "Are you going to take it?" She was quiet for a long time, looking out the window at an ordinary suburban street. Kids riding bikes, someone mowing a lawn, the kind of normal that had been impossible for her for 7 years. "I don't know," she said finally. "They keep asking me what I want, and I've spent so long being told what to want, being told what to wear and say and be—" She turned to look at him. "I don't know what I want anymore." "Then maybe that's where you start," Ji-hoon said. "Figuring it out." She smiled, small and uncertain, but real. "The therapist said something similar." Smart therapist. Carolyn pulled her sleeves over her hands, a gesture he recognized from 100 late-night encounters. But this time she caught herself and pulled them back up. Deliberate. Choosing. "I want to live," she said. The words came out fierce. "Not hide, not disappear, live. I want to go to a grocery store. I want to have coffee in a normal cafe. I want to walk down a street without checking over my shoulder." Her eyes met his. "Is that allowed? Am I allowed to want that?" "Yes," Ji-hoon said. His throat felt tight. "God, yes." They sat in silence for a while. Then Carolyn said quietly, "You saw me?" "Yes." "When no one else did. When I'd made myself invisible on purpose because invisible felt safer than seen." She looked down at her hands. "You saw me anyway." Ji-hoon thought about that night in the West Wing. The crying that had changed everything, the choice he'd made to finally stop walking past. "You were never invisible," he said. "You were just surrounded by people who chose not to look." Carolyn's eyes filled with tears, the first he'd seen her cry since that night. But she was smiling too. "Thank you," she whispered, "for looking." 6 months later. The foundation occupied a modest office in a converted warehouse downtown. No marble floors, no crystal chandeliers, just good lighting, comfortable chairs, and a staff of 12 people who'd all been silenced at some point in their lives. Ji-hoon stood in the main office looking at the intake board. 43 active cases, people who'd witnessed wrongdoing and been threatened into silence, workers who'd been abused and had nowhere safe to report it, victims whose stories had been buried under NDAS and hush money. "Mr. Kim?" His assistant poked her head in. "The lawyer's online too. Says the settlement came through." Ji-hoon picked up the phone. The powerful man had finally accepted a plea deal, reduced charges in exchange for a complete financial settlement to Carolyn and the 5 other women who'd come forward after Ji-hoon's evidence went public. It wasn't justice. Not really. But it was something. He finished the call and looked around the office. It was smaller than his startup had been, less prestigious, less profitable. He'd never make back what he'd lost. But every day, someone walked through their doors who'd thought they had no voice. And every day, his team helped them find it. Ji-hoon walked through the west wing of the mansion at night. He'd been invited back, The house had been seized by the court and was being converted into a crisis center for domestic violence survivors. They wanted his input on the renovation. He stood in the hallway where he'd first heard her crying. The panic room had been removed. The walls would be repainted. The whole wing would be filled with light and safety and people being helped instead of hidden. But for now, it was just him and the empty hall and the memory of the sound that had changed everything. He'd thought the crying would haunt him forever. The way it had echoed through these walls, through his conscience, through every choice he'd made to stay silent. Instead, it had taught him something more valuable than any business degree or tech fortune: how to listen when it mattered, how to act when action cost everything, how to see people even when they'd made themselves invisible. Especially then. Ji-hoon turned off the light and walked toward the exit. Outside, his car waited in the driveway. Not expensive anymore, just functional, just enough. He thought about Carolyn, who'd sent him a photo last week from a coffee shop. Just her and a latte and a book, her face relaxed and ordinary and free. He thought about the 43 people on the intake board, each one trusting his foundation to help them stand up when standing felt impossible. He thought about his empty apartment and his vanished company and his ruined reputation. And he felt, for the first time in his life, completely at peace. He thought the crying would haunt him. Instead, it taught him how to listen. Thank you for staying till the end. Most people click away, but you didn't, and that means something. Don't disappear now. Subscribe, stay close this year, and keep walking with us through these stories. Comment, share, and tell me where you're watching from. Your voice matters more than you know today.